Inside military command centers, screens lit up with urgent intelligence reports flooding in from across the region. The situation on the ground had shifted faster than anyone had anticipated. Analysts moved quickly between stations, cross-referencing satellite data with field reports. Within minutes, the assessment was complete. The decision came from the highest levels. An emergency deployment was authorized. Units that had been on standby for weeks received the signal they had been waiting for. The order was simple and direct. Move out. Now. The message traveled through military networks at speed. Bases across multiple locations began activating rapid deployment procedures simultaneously. What had been a quiet morning on several air bases changed in an instant. Alarms sounded across barracks. Lights came on in rooms that had been dark. Soldiers who had been sleeping, eating, and waiting were suddenly on their feet, moving fast. On the ground outside, the first signs of the operation were already visible. Rows of military helicopters sat on the flight line with ground crews moving urgently around them. Mechanics crouched beside landing gear assemblies, checking hydraulic lines and brake systems with flashlights. Others worked at engine access panels, hands moving quickly through final checks. Every aircraft had to be ready. There was no margin for mechanical failure once the operation began. The soldiers themselves were already fully equipped. Body armor secured tightly across their chests. Helmets strapped in place. Heavy bags loaded with equipment, ammunition, water, and field supplies sitting at their feet. Many of them had been on standby for hours, gear packed and ready, waiting for the command that had now finally arrived. They moved immediately. No hesitation, no delay. The rear ramps of the waiting helicopters lowered toward the ground. Soldiers stepped forward, climbing into the aircraft one by one. Inside the cargo bay, fold-down seats lined both walls. Each soldier quickly secured their equipment and buckled into position. Crew members moved down the line, performing rapid safety checks. Within minutes, every seat was filled. The ramps lifted and sealed shut. Outside, the massive rotors began spinning faster, whipping dust across the tarmac in violent waves. Ground crews stepped back and signaled the pilots. One by one, the aircraft lifted off. They rose briefly above the ground, then pitched forward and accelerated into the sky. Their destination was the desert staging area, already being established hundreds of kilometers away. Back on the air bases, the logistical machine had fully awakened. Across the tarmac, enormous military transport aircraft lined the runway with ground crews moving rapidly between them. Heavy equipment was being loaded with organized urgency. Soldiers formed human chains, passing equipment cases hand to hand from storage areas toward waiting aircraft. Heavy crates were carried by pairs of soldiers straining under the weight, moving in coordinated steps toward open cargo ramps. Cases were slid along metal roller tracks into aircraft interiors, guided by soldiers inside who positioned and secured each load carefully. Among the heaviest loads being prepared were weapon systems. Long cylindrical components were carried on padded frames by teams of 4 soldiers, moving slowly and deliberately toward aircraft. Each component was lifted with care and locked into mounting positions. Cargo crews secured everything to the floor with thick straps, checking tension on each connection before moving to the next load. Nothing inside the aircraft could shift once airborne. Behind the weapon systems came the ammunition. Crates carefully labeled and stacked in precise positions. Then came the supplies required to keep soldiers operational in the field. Food rations, water containers, medical equipment, communication gear, vehicle parts, portable generators. Aircraft after aircraft was loaded to full capacity. Once secured, the transport planes taxied toward the runway. Engines roared. Moments later, they lifted into the sky, one after another. And the moment one aircraft departed, another moved forward to take its place. The supply pipeline had been opened and it would not stop. Thousands of kilometers away in the desert, the advance unit had already arrived. Their aircraft had descended toward a wide stretch of open, flat desert. Dust had swirled across the landing zone. The rear ramps had dropped and soldiers stepped out quickly, spreading across the terrain with their gear. Their mission was critical. establish a forward staging base before the larger units arrived. But there was nothing there. No structures, no roads, just open dry desert stretching in every direction. So they began building from scratch. Equipment cases were unloaded and opened on dry desert ground. Soldiers worked fast in the heat. Tripod-mounted equipment was assembled and positioned across the staging area. Communication antennas were raised and connected to equipment units on the ground. Cables were unrolled across the desert surface between positions. Soldiers checked screens showing signal data, adjusting antenna directions carefully. Military vehicles were unloaded from aircraft and moved into position. Mechanics crouched beside vehicles checking track assemblies and engine bays. Others leaned into open hatches checking interior systems. Every piece of equipment had to be verified and ready before the main force arrived. As more aircraft landed in sequence, additional soldiers poured out across the staging area. Equipment was distributed quickly and efficiently. Weapon systems were checked and loaded. Soldiers in pairs examined ammunition feeds on mounted systems, checking mechanisms carefully. Others checked handheld weapons, turning them over and examining each component before securing them. The staging area that had been empty desert just hours before was rapidly becoming a functioning forward position. Vehicles were arranged in organized lines. Equipment was positioned across the area. Communication links were confirmed active. What had started as a bare desert was now connected to the broader military network. Out at sea, preparations continued without pause aboard the large vessels carrying additional units. Below deck in tight compartments, soldiers gathered for briefings. Maps were spread across tables. Mission details delivered quickly and directly. Rules of engagement, emergency procedures, contingency plans. The briefings were short, no unnecessary words. When the officers finished, the soldiers moved immediately back to their stations. Ammunition crates were opened. Magazines were passed down the line. The sound of rounds being loaded into magazines echoed through the metal compartments. Weapons were checked carefully. Communication equipment was tested. Machine gun teams assembled their systems nearby. Belts of ammunition prepared and threaded through feed mechanisms. Every soldier had something to do, and they did it without being told twice. As night fell over the desert staging area, the work continued without stopping. The harsh daylight that had baked the ground all day gave way to complete darkness. Soldiers switched to night vision equipment. The desert that had been clearly visible in warm, sandy tones became a green, monochrome world of shapes and shadows. Patrols moved out from the perimeter in single file lines, stepping carefully through dark, rocky terrain. Others held static positions at the outer edges of the staging area, completely still, scanning the dark horizon with night vision equipment. The silence was complete except for the quiet crackle of radio communications between positions. Inside the staging area, mechanics continued working on vehicles under shaded work lights. Hands moved across components in the artificial light, checking connections and tightening fasteners. Communication specialists monitored equipment screens showing steady signal data from aircraft still arriving overhead and vessels offshore. The entire system, from the air bases to the ships at sea to this forward position in the desert, was now fully connected and operational. And everyone present understood the same thing. This deployment had not happened without reason. The scale of what was being assembled in this desert was significant. Soldiers, vehicles, weapon systems, supplies, communication networks, all of it pointing in the same direction. If the order came, the force assembled here would already be exactly where it needed to be. Equipment checked, weapons loaded, positions established, ready to move at a moment's notice, ready for whatever came next across the desert horizon. The buildup was not finished. More aircraft were still inbound. More equipment was still being loaded onto transport planes thousands of kilometers away. The pipeline of personnel and supplies that had been opened would continue operating through the night and into the following day. Because whoever had made the decision to deploy this force had not done so lightly. And the soldiers now working through the desert night understood that better than anyone.